You are listening to Workplace Stories, a podcast by Red Thread Research about the near future of work.
I'm Stacia Gar, co-founder and principal analyst at Red Thread.
And I'm Danny Johnson, co-founder and principal analyst at Red Thread.
And I'm Chris Pirrie of the Learning Futures Group. And you're listening to Season 6 of Workplace Stories, a season we call the Great Reconnection.
We would like to thank our friends at Torch for sponsoring this podcast season. Torch is the people development platform that fuels leadership development through the power of trusted relationships. By combining coaching, mentoring, and collaborative learning, Torch helps you develop successful leaders aligned with your organization's strategies and values. Visit trch.info for more information.
If you can't wait for more episodes on the Great Reconnection, we have also dropped an early access episode this season. Just head on over to redthreadresearch.com/podcast/early access to hear from Dave Ulrich, who's been called the father of modern HR for his work on organization capability, collaboration, talent management, and culture change.
Join us for a sneak peek of his episode. You don't have to wait till the end of the season. You can actually tune in now at redthreadresearch.com/podcast/early access.
Our conversation today is with Matt Gosney, Vice President of Organizational Development and Learning Services at UCHealth. Matt is an executive leader whose primary focus is in partnering with leaders in articulating an organizationally aligned talent strategy. As part of that work, he has experience in developing leadership development, onboarding, employee development, employee engagement, and coaching programs designed to know, grow, and move talent throughout the organization. We talked to Matt about the work UCHealth is doing to enable connection and growth. Specifically, we discuss why connection and growth are critical to UCHealth's employment value proposition and significantly contribute to recruiting and retention efforts. We also talk about how some of UCHealth's previous talent processes, namely performance management, were actively working against that EVP of connection and growth and what Matt and his team did about it. We talked a lot about how UCHealth is empowering managers to have career conversations with every single employee and how that has unleashed a tidal wave of connection and contribution. He also shares some of the unintended consequences of that work, specifically a dramatic improvement in their diverse talent pipeline. I've known Matt for a few years and have always found him thoughtful, practical, and fun. He's all of those things and more in this conversation. I hope you enjoy. Matt, welcome to Workplace Stories. We are so excited to have you with us today.
Stacia and Danny, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled.
Danny and I were talking about this. I think I met you for the first time in 2018, just as we kicked off Red Thread. So it feels a little bit full circle to have you come on the podcast, get to share your experience with us today.
No, I'm excited. That's awesome. And you all have grown this to something really spectacular and something you should be proud of. So I'm thrilled to have seen it grown and excited to now get to participate a little bit.
Thank you. So let's give our listeners an introduction to you. So can you start by telling us a little bit about the organization you work with, which is UCHealth?
You bet. UCHealth is an academic healthcare system. We are headquartered in the Denver metro area. We're about 28,000 employees. So we're a large organization affiliated with, but not part of, the University of Colorado School of Medicine. We have hospitals, clinics, both primary care and specialty clinics throughout the Rocky Mountain region, extending into relationships in Nebraska and Wyoming. So we've got a large geographic footprint. We've got a variety of hospitals from critical access to regional to large academic medical centers. And we are the only academic healthcare system in the region. So we provide very critical care to very important population.
And I want to double click on that for just a minute, which we don't often do in the intro, but you and I have had a couple previous conversations, so I've got a bit of insight. Yeah. You mentioned the academic aspect of UCHealth. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important, particularly as you think about the talent marketplace that you exist within?
Absolutely. Because we are the only academic healthcare system, I think that creates a value proposition that's interesting for the talent marketplace, but also deep meaning for those that are part of the talent within the organization. And that is that we very much lean into innovation. We very much lean into practicing at the top of our scope. That's a phrase that you hear a lot in healthcare, is practicing at the top of our scope, at the top of our license. That's something that we try and do across the entire organization, right? How can we do the very best, be the very best? We truly believe that an individual that walks into one of our facilities, and one of our clinics, and one of our hospitals is going to get better care than if they walked into any other hospital or clinic. And because of that, we are passionate and driven to expand that care to as many Coloradans as we can.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your title, and how would you describe the work that you do?
My title is Vice President of Organizational Development and Learning Services. I've been with UCHealth for about 6 years. And to answer your question a little bit more broadly, I joined the organization 6 years ago when the system was fairly new. And they had really just articulated their organizational strategy, right? Here's what we're going to do to go win in the marketplace. And that was a perfect time. And that's really what attracted me to the position, is they said, now that we have this organizational strategy, we need a people strategy. And that's really what I do. My job and my team's job is to help UCHealth know, grow, and move the right kind of talent for our organizational strategy, and that aligns with our mission. So we've got a mission, we've got a strategy. Now we need the people to fuel that growth, that development, that innovation. And that's really what we do. We identify that talent, we grow it, we nurture it, we move it throughout the organization.
And how did you come to do this work?
Oh, dumb luck. I don't know. My youngest just finished kindergarten. You know, you go to the little kindergarten. It's not a graduation. They don't call it a graduation, but it's a little ceremony. And they all got to dress up as what they wanted to be when they grew up. And nobody dressed up as an OD practitioner. I was really disappointed that no one said, I want to be in human resources. And I was the same, right? I was in kindergarten. I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do, but I fell into it. I got lucky right out of college with a job as a corporate trainer. And that really unlocked something in me where I discovered I love helping people learn, helping give people the tools and the resources they need to do their job and to do it fully and to do it well and to find joy and fulfillment. And then really, as my career progressed, and I stepped out of healthcare but came back into healthcare, what I added to that was a real deep passion around healthcare. When you can help people do their job well and help organizations whose missions you believe in achieve that mission, that's a really nice synergy personally. So that's kind of how I fell into it, and have continued to grow from corporate trainer to today.
And then just one final intro question. What do you find to be the most challenging aspect of the work you're doing?
The urgency. We can't move fast enough. And there's several reasons for that. One is because, at least at UCHealth, we have grown rapidly and are continuing to grow. When I joined the organization 6 years ago, we were at 16,000 employees. We're at 28,000 now, right? So that's pretty significant growth in a pretty short amount of time. Add to that, no surprise, we're coming out of an unparalleled time in our nation's history. And the way that we worked in those 2 years is not going to set us up for the way we need to work in the future. The style of leadership that was necessary, crisis management leadership in healthcare, that is not going to suit us in the future. And so we can't move fast enough. We can't right the ship and give leaders the tools and the resources, employees the support and direction that they need fast enough. So it's just speed.
And it kind of leads us into what we want to talk about next, which is sort of the context. So I'm hoping, I missed the pre-call, but I'm hoping that Stacia warned you what this particular podcast season was on. It's about reconnection and the role that leadership plays there. We were very deliberate about the word reconnection versus just connection because of what you just mentioned. The last couple of years, everybody has been kind of disconnected. And now as people are coming back into the office and redefining how we'll be working in the future, we need to reconnect. So talk to me a little bit about why you think connection is important and why you think reconnection is important at this particular time.
Yeah. So first, connection is important because that is how all work gets done. It is a baseline antecedent to progress and to delivery of results. If you do not have trust and personal connective relationship, as human beings, we're not wired for work itself. We do it because of the benefit that it creates for ourselves, our family, for the meaning that we get from it, because we feel part of a community that is depending upon that work. But all of those are truly elements of connection, right? The connection that I have with my family, the connection that I have with my peer group, the connection that I have with those that are directing the work. If I don't feel it, then I'm not going to go do it. That has become all the more significant in the last 2 years. And as we are exiting the last 2 years, folks are burnt out. Folks are tired. Folks are, particularly in healthcare, folks are exhausted by the experience that they have had. And the answer to that exhaustion is not PTO, right? You can't vacation yourself out of a burnt out state. You can't do it. And it's not gym memberships, and it's not puppy therapy, though I love puppy therapy. It is connecting to a larger purpose, right? That's what helps alleviate burnout, is when I feel meaning and purpose and reconnection to meaning and purpose. And that happens through dialogue, it happens through conversation, it happens through connection and relationship. That's how that work gets done. And so reconnection is crucial, because if we don't reconnect them to our mission and our values, they are going to go connect to something. And it might not be our mission and our values. And that's part of the reason why I think we're seeing so many leave whatever organization they are, is because they no longer feel connected to what the organization was trying to accomplish.
Let's talk a little bit about that tangentially. Let's talk about organizational purpose and the organization's responsibility with respect to connection. But I also want your opinion on the individual leader's responsibility with respect to connection. So what's the org's responsibility and what's the individual leader's responsibility? Well,
the org's responsibility is, one, to set a vision and have a mission that is resonant and the individual can believe in, right? So for example, our mission is to improve lives, right? And that is it. It's 3 words: we improve lives. That's a really great mission, right? I mean, it's hard to argue against getting excited about that. And if we're going to have that mission, then the other element of the organization's responsibility is to try and live that mission as fully as we possibly can, to make it obvious and clear and transparent that we make decisions based on our mission, our vision, our values. We're not going to be perfect, but as the more transparency that we can create in the way that our decisions are guided by our mission, then the more organizational trust that creates. The local leader's responsibility, however, is to make that come alive in the work of the local unit. So if I'm leading a team, my job isn't just to say, here's the work that we need to do. It is now, here's the work that we need to do and how it helps our organization achieve its mission. And I think what's going to become even more important is those conversations around, what is your mission as an individual? What are you trying to accomplish? What's important to you? And how do we align that with what the organization is trying to achieve so that you feel connected to it? If I personally am a nurse and I got into nursing because I want to make a difference in the lives of patients, and I felt that calling to nursing, then as a leader, my job is to say, see how your work connects with our mission to improve lives, right? What you do, and this is the best place to do it. And we'll continue to invest in you to help you grow and develop so that you can be more of who you want to be. I think that is the work of the frontline leader.
I love this, and I want to sort of bring it back to you and your personal experience. We recently read some Harvard data, which it's a stat that's quoted a lot, but during the pandemic, people lost about 16% of their networks. You just kind of went away. That's about 200 people.
Right.
Just kind of disappeared from your life. During the pandemic, how did you maintain connection to both the purpose or the mission that your organization set out, as well as personal level to the people that you were dealing with?
Healthcare is an interesting animal, because I heard somebody say that culture isn't in your building, culture is in the hearts of your employees, which is a great quote and totally not true if you're in healthcare, right? Because all you have to do is walk into the lobby of a children's hospital and go, no, the culture lives right here, right? Or any hospital, right? Walk in, walk around, and see the culture being lived in real time. So Healthcare is experiencing an interesting phenomenon because we are not fully participating in the shift to hybrid work. We are partially, and there are times and places where we are, but we are always going to be a patient-facing organization. That's just who we are and what we do. That being said, we are more spread out than we have ever been, and we do have to be far more intentional than we have ever been. There's several ways that we've tried to tackle some of this challenge. One is to give folks work that is meaningful and that aligns with solving the problems of today. So that helped tremendously, right? In terms of helping people connect with the mission, right? So for my team, for example, as we were identifying challenges that leaders were facing, we asked them to go out and first find what those challenges were and then create solutions that felt like they were real time and bespoke, right? So as the leaders were saying, man, I'm really struggling with how to solve just the volume of work that's coming at me and how to prioritize it, right, in the midst of the pandemic. Then taking that to our team and saying, solve this, right? Don't solve everything, but just help them solve this. It helped make them feel more connected to what we were trying to accomplish in the moment. But there's also this, as you mentioned, just interpersonal connection. And the risk in a virtual environment or a hybrid environment is that the only thing you talk about is work. Right, that is the major risk, because the only conversation we ever have is a conversation about what we have to talk about. And so I have, at least in my personal leadership, have actively tried to avoid that. If it's taking a team meeting and only talking about where you're going to go for summer vacation, right? Or what everybody is listening to right now, or whatever it is, it's peeling back some of the professional and allowing folks to bring in the personal. Because in a virtual environment, it feels like folks feel like they need permission to do that more than they did previously. Previously, it felt like if there was small talk before a meeting started, you could say, that your kids had softball last weekend, or that you and your partner saw a movie, or whatever it was. And we don't create space for that anymore. So as a leader, you have to be far more intentional in creating that space and giving permission to talk about nonsense, right?
Yeah. But it's not nonsense. I mean, to your
isn't.
point, right? Like it's part of the connective tissue of a community, really.
Absolutely.
I want to touch on that point a little bit more, because in a previous call we did for a different piece of research, you had what I thought was a really powerful quote, which was, the challenge of the next decade for organizations will be to figure out how to create a space where individuals can feel heard, aligned, and part of something bigger while still getting the work done. And I thought that was just a really nice, succinct summary of really what we've been talking about. So I'm going to kind of build on that and ask, as you think about moving forward, what is the challenge that folks are having with doing that? Why is that hard to do?
Because our country, our world has never been more noisy, more bifurcated in terms of their opinions. And that's okay, right? Folks should have the right to have whatever personal beliefs and opinions they want to espouse, and that those come from a value set that is important and personal to them. That being said, we have a mission to achieve. And so I think what becomes critical for the leader is, if you don't create a culture of shared adoption and championing of the mission, right? If you don't create a culture, shared adoption and championing of the values that you operate under, and a shared understanding of how those values look when they are lived, if you don't create that, then the external forces that are only getting louder outside of your organization are going to start to dictate the work that people do within the organization, or at least take their eye off of the focus of the mission of the organization, and instead, I think it's natural, become influenced by the noise that's happening outside. We still want people to be their true, authentic selves. We need them to be their true, authentic selves. We need them to bring their unique perspective. We need them to bring that in purpose and service to what we're all trying to collectively achieve together. I don't know that that has always been either top of mind or top priority for a leader, right? I think for generations, we've been able to assume that individuals show up generally ready to buy in and ready to pull. I don't think that that's going to be the case anymore. I think leaders, as I said previously, the work of the leader in the next decade is to create that place and space where folks can feel that they are their authentic selves, but that they are their authentic selves contributing to a mission that we all collectively believe in.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because I know your organization has also done some stuff on performance management and leadership and learning to try and do some of this. So I love the fact that you're talking about holding the outside out, basically, and saying, hey, we together are going to move in this direction, and we have to hold some of that noise out in order to do that. I know that you recently redesigned your performance management stuff. Mm-hmm. Was that part of that effort?
It predated it, but I think it's an important piece of it, right? Because what we did is we blew up our performance evaluation process, and we now have what we call career conversations. Career conversations is a forward-looking dialogue between the individual and their leader that focuses on where are you today and where do you want to go tomorrow, right? How can we grow you to be more of what you want to be in a way that helps the organization move itself forward as well, right? It's discussing that synergy between what you want and what we need and how we get you there. And that is an important skill for leaders, right? To be able to hold that dialogue in a way that affirms and a way that champions and supports. And so it's really important muscle that we're trying to build with our leaders. It's one of the ways that we're doing it. And I think it's probably one of the most obvious ways is in this work that we're doing around performance management. But we also want employees to think of their own growth and development in terms of how do I grow within this organization? How do I create more value for the organization? We just got through doing some work on strategic planning within HR, and we kind of laid out some of the challenges that we see in the environment today. One of the most significant challenges is that there's never been more ways of doing work and new work to do ever. The rapid rate of change of the way individuals create value and the way that they deliver their work is changing. It's exponential in terms of its growth rate. And so we can't monitor all of that at the executive level. We've got to be able to let leaders and their employees start to carve out what that path looks like, and then try and meet them in the middle and say, now, yes, you found, if that's how you're going to create value, let's pull it up so that we can align it with the needs of the organization. But back to your original question, it is a critical muscle for our leaders to build. They have to be able to sit down, have a dialogue, have an open conversation, talk about where they're at today, how they can get better so they can go where they want to tomorrow, and how are we going to support them, because otherwise they're going to go have that conversation somewhere else, right? They're going to have that dialogue about their career with somebody. And so we want it to be with building that relationship with their leader.
I love this. And Dave Ulrich was one of our guests in this season as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he has a phrase that he used to use. I don't know if he uses it anymore. I worked for him for a while. He calls it eye to eye, knee to knee. Mm-hmm. So you sit down eye to eye, knee to knee with somebody and have these types of conversations. In our experience, Stacia's and mine, until the pandemic, we didn't hear a lot of people say, we just love our frontline managers. We think they just have all the skills they need in order to, we didn't hear that a lot. And so how are you helping those managers create the connection they need in order to have those conversations? Because it takes quite a bit of trust for me to sit down and say, hey, Matt, I'm done with finance. I want to go to marketing. How do I get there? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. There's a couple of ways that we're doing it. One is through creating talent management process that creates accountability for those conversations, right? That's first and foremost. I firmly believe HR's job is to create processes that create accountabilities that lead to good action, right? So that's what we're supposed to be doing. And so we've done that. Career conversations is one example. The things that we do around employee engagement are another example, right, of eye-to-eye, knee-to-knee conversations, where we've really redesigned that process to be much more conversation-focused and not data-focused or question-focused. So that's the first piece. But then second piece is to train our leaders on our style of leadership, right? What does this look like? How do you do it? And what's interesting is we can teach the same class 5 times in different contexts, right? Here's how to have a conversation around employee engagement. it's the same set of skills as here's how to have a career conversations, which is the same set of skills as here's how to have a stay interview, right? Which is the same. We repeat it over and over again. What we're going to be doing actually this coming year is really focusing on what we're calling leadership basics, right? Our UC Health style of leadership, with this as a through line. Here's how we lead in our organization. We lead through values and we lead through relationship. So helping to really create that baseline expectation and understanding that leaders, this is how we lead, and we're going to create accountability to help you lead in that fashion, and we're going to provide you the training tools and support so that you can get there.
You've made a bunch of changes. How's it being received by your employees and by your leaders?
So no leader wakes up and thinks, what can I do to make my employees miserable today, right? That they don't do it. So what most leaders have lacked is either the structure or the tools or the know-how, right? Yep. So for most leaders, once we provided them structure, tools, and know-how, they went, yeah, this is what I've wanted to do as a leader all along, right? That's mostly why folks go into leadership, is because they want to make a difference in the lives of individuals. And so leaders have embraced it. Not all leaders, right? Some chafe at it because it feels like a lot of extra work or more time away from the management aspects of work. And so with those, we have to either show them this ends up being more effective, or maybe this isn't the right culture for you. For employees, they like it because this is what they have wanted, right? They have wanted and asked for this style of leadership. In fact, as I mentioned, we blew up our employee engagement survey process. And one of the things that we did is we shortened the survey to just a handful of questions, very small question set. And we don't ask leaders to send in action plans or any of that nonsense anymore. Instead, we just say, take your results, go have a conversation with your team, right? About what the data is telling you, about what actions should result from the data. And then the very next question of the following survey is, did your leader have a conversation with you about the previous survey, about the last set of questions? And there's no hiding there, right? That's a yes or no. Either the employees say, yep, you did, or no, you didn't. And what we have found, what the data now showed, was first, when a leader has what we call a high action check-in score, engagement tends to be high, right? Which should not be a surprise, right? Leaders that are having the conversation have engaged teams. However, what was really fascinating is that when a leader had a high action check-in score, engagement improved over time. So regardless of what questions we asked, it didn't matter what questions we asked. Simply the act of leaders having meaningful dialogue with their teams about whatever the topic was led to improved engagement. Which, if you've studied the Hawthorne effect in your undergraduate program, you know that we've known about this for a long, long time, but it keeps being proved over and over and over again. When leaders are engaged, having conversations, taking a personal interest in the team, and when that leads to visible, transparent action, it leads to a more engaged workforce.
So how do we make sure that leaders do this, right? Because to your point, we've known this for a while. Our data shows this too. So you mentioned, part of HR's role is to put in place processes. We would say, in Danny and my parlance, to put in place systems, right. Organizational systems. So how do we do this so it's not just entirely dependent on a leader and their desire to focus on their people?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, and as you stated, it is systems and it's systems based. You have to embed this in as many talent management systems or processes as you can, right? Mm-hmm. And that's part of what we've done, is found ways to make these systems administratively easy while also focused on dialogue or conversation, because that's the other challenge, is you can't just say, leaders, here's a bunch of processes that are going to require you to talk to your team more, but they're also going to take you an hour to administer every time, and there's going to be a bunch of forms to fill out. And you've got to take off some of the administrative burden if you're going to ask them to take more of a burden or greater mind share and greater time share in engaging in relationship and dialogue. So that's part of what we've done as well, is how can we make things administratively simple, but also focused on these core competencies of dialogue, of conversation, of connection and reconnection. And so that's a lot of what we've been doing, is looking at our talent management processes. And as they connect to the leader, how can we make it easier? But then also, how can we get them eye to eye, knee to knee, as Dave would say.
You also mentioned earlier, you were giving tools to managers to help them do this.
Yes.
What kinds of tools are you providing?
Yeah, it can be anything from cheat sheets and one-pagers of here's how to do it effectively, to drop-in sessions on if somebody wants some coaching, to formal classes, right? Formal educational experiences with role-playing. And it just depends on event and their need. But anything and everything to create that type of expectation. The other thing that we did specifically around employee engagement is we hold what we call best practice summits, where leaders can come together and share with one another what they're learning, how their conversations are going, what problems they're running into, because let them learn from one another. It's the very best possible scenario. And they have generated far better ideas than would have ever come out of my team just together and collectively. And we don't have to be the single source of truth or the single source of best practice. They learn to network and depend upon one another. So that's been a major leverage point in terms of helping them build their skill and feel more confident in their skill.
Can you talk to us about how you've been thinking about the evolution to this focus on connections? Obviously, more important post-pandemic than even beforehand. But where did you start and where are you going from here?
Yeah, we started at the very basics, right? We started with employee engagement. And we really started because our chief executive officer said, can you give me a process that actually improves employee engagement? We went, oh, no. Maybe. And that really required us and me to sit back and say, well, what would, right? What would? And once we found that it was effective, we said, man, this is what we need to be doing everywhere. And that was when performance management came to the forefront, and we knew we wanted to redesign performance management and simplify it. And so it became another place where we could embed this work, this skill, and this concept. It extended then again into our retention efforts and stay interview process. And it's continued to scaffold. Where I think we are going, where I know we are going, is in these coming years, we are going to need a refocus on culture that is crucial. As I mentioned earlier, the last 2 years has required us to act in a way that is, and lead in a way that was very reactionary, and that was born of necessity and not necessarily always values driven, right? Mm-hmm. So we've probably gotten into some bad habits. The analogy that I utilize is that we've run red line over rough terrain for 2 years. You can't be surprised when things are out of alignment and the engine needs a tune-up, right? And so that's absolutely where we are at. And so that is largely the work of the leader, the local leader. Now we're bringing a systems-based approach because I believe that culture isn't just HR's work, right? Culture is an influence of multiple systems, decision-making and structural and technological, et cetera. But the only way to create change within any of those systems is leaders having dialogue about where are the misalignments, right? So if we have a misalignment in the decision-making system in the way that decisions are made that no longer align with our stated culture or the values that we espouse, the leader needs to, and we have to train that leader to engage in a dialogue that says, where are the misalignments? What are 1 or 2 changes that we can make that bring us closer to being who we want to be? And so that's really the work that we're going to be focused on. Interestingly enough, I think it's going to be just as critical for our DE&I efforts, right? Because once again, DE&I work boils down to how closely are we living our values? Where are our values and our actions misaligned? And what steps can we take to align our values with our actions? That happens through dialogue, right? There's no data that I can look at that says, here's where our actions are misaligned. That only is uncovered through conversation. So in the coming year, I think that's going to be crucial work for us, and the next step in our evolution as we develop our leaders, giving them the resources that they need to have those conversations and to shore up and re-energize our culture.
How are you measuring the success of some of the things that you're implementing?
There's several ways that we can measure it. Obviously, employee engagement is one, though that data, we have purposely held off on some of our engagement survey work over the past couple of years just because we've only got so much that we can metabolize at one time. However, more probably broader data points, we look at internal promotion. That's a major data point for us, because if we are knowing, growing, and moving the right talent, then we should be growing more of our talent. If our career conversation process is working correctly, then we should be better preparing individuals to step into future roles. And our data shows that we're having a positive impact there, by the way. 5 years ago, our internal promotion rate was 37%. It is now 67%. And that's, once again, in the face of growing the headcount from 16 to 28,000. So we know that we're having a positive impact there. But we also look at things like turnover data. And turnover data is tricky in this environment because everybody is losing folks faster than they have before. But we want to compare not just against our past, but against our peers, right? Are we losing more and more quickly? And we're not. We're actually finding that our rate of departure isn't what our peers are experiencing. It's higher than we want, but it's better than a lot of folks are dealing with. So those types of data points are crucial. I would love for us to get even more predictive, right, where we can look at some data that more fully predicts. If that's some internal mobility things, I would like to look at that and create some scorecards around that, but that is in the future.
One statistic you didn't mention, but you did on a previous call, is around how a focus on the future and careers and opportunity and growth has impacted your talent pipeline, and particularly around diverse candidates. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. One of the great things about, and I wouldn't say an unintended consequence, but probably at least initially a peripheral consequence of our work around performance management, is when everybody has a career conversation, it means everybody gets to have a career conversation. And that has not always been the case, right? Oftentimes, the conversation around where do you want to go in your career has been selective based on who the leader wanted to have that conversation with. And so what we have found is, as we have focused on career conversations for everyone, and also a more intensive focus on diversity within our talent pipeline, right? Ensuring that the data that we're bringing up from career conversations and that we're looking down and from our succession planning process, that those match up. What we're finding is an increased representation of our BIPOC community within our talent pipeline, upwards around 40% increase in that representation. And it makes sense, right? I mean, it's one of those things that you go, well, yeah, of course, but opportunity to have conversations about your career has not always been an equitable process. And so creating equity within that process, we shouldn't be overly surprised when we see that it yields productive fruit.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, though, that so many organizations try to fix the problem in different ways. And you address some of the issues associated with that problem just by having career conversations with everybody.
Yeah. And it doesn't solve everything, right? But yes, you cannot talk therapy your way out of
or special group your way out of some of these challenges.
Exactly. Yeah. And in fact, that's interesting. Several years ago, when the organization was trying to really wrap their minds around what do we want to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, I had posted to report to me a diversity, equity, and inclusion role. And what I got back was a lot of folks that wanted to teach bias training, right? Implicit bias training. And that has a really important place. And so I don't want to undermine that. It is critical, but it felt to me insufficient. Right. And so I came back to my CHRO and I said, we're not going to solve our problem. If our problem is everybody in the executive leadership is pale and male, right? Then, or at least pale, right? Healthcare, we've probably got better gender representation than most. But if that's the problem we're trying to solve, then teaching people about implicit bias isn't going to solve it. Right? We have to impact our succession planning and performance management processes, and obviously our leadership development programs, but especially we've got to have equity within those talent pipeline processes. Otherwise, we're never going to solve this problem. And so that's really what we did. We very intentionally pivoted away from a more traditional DE&I strategy and focused instead on how do we create equity within our talent management process.
We recently just did some research on learning equity. the
Yeah.
things that the learning department can do to actually affect a lot of those things, like making everything transparent or taking the bias out of decisions about who gets what opportunities. And it was amazing. Like, it was the first time I had thought of it in terms of, let's fix the systems already in place instead of adding a system on top to fix DEI.
DE&I, our chief diversity officer likes to say, and I think it's so smart, DE&I is really just being more of who we say we are, right? If our mission is to improve lives, then our DE&I strategy should be, that includes everybody, right? Improving everybody's lives is our mission, not just certain folks. And so when you look at it that way, right, when you look at DE&I as simply a catalyst for being more of who you say you're going to be, then it becomes real easy to adopt it as a strategy and to apply it to whatever it is that you're doing. So as opposed to it being its own thing that sits apart.
I think we've actually seen that sort of shift also happening with the technology. So when we first started Red Thread, we launched a DEIB tech study, which was great. And we had 3 different categories of vendors, one which we called focused. So that's the only thing they did was DEIB. One that we called feature. So they had a DEIB feature. And then one that we called friendly. So friendly meaning that there was a positive impact, but like it wasn't really designed for that. What we found the second year that we ran the study was that a large number of those folks who are friendlies moved to feature. So now what we're seeing is there's a lot of technologies that have DEIB features built into them. And we didn't see a similar increase in the number of focused vendors. So the point being that people are really starting to think from a tech perspective of how do we build this into our existing platforms, not, to Danny's point, always just layering something else on top.
Well, yeah. And really, I mentioned the research that exists that talks very clearly about how organizations and teams make better decisions when they are heterogeneous, right? We know that. We know that groups make better choices, that it leads to better outcomes when there is diversity of thought, of background, of approach, etc. And when you come at DE&I from that perspective, and when you teach your leaders to come at DEI from that perspective, which is to make the very best decision possible for this organization to achieve its mission of improving lives, you can't actively disassociate a percentage of your population. You're never going to get where we need to get to as fast as we need to get there unless you embrace diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, and diversity of background. Yeah. And so I love hearing that technology is moving that way. I think leadership development is moving that way, so that it, once again, DE&I isn't a class that I take all by myself. It is woven through the dialogue around what does effective leadership even look like.
So we've asked a lot about kind of your journey to date, and we asked you a little bit of what's ahead for UCHealth. I want to ask you kind of a little bit more of a crystal ball question, which is, if you think about the future, what do you think we're going to be doing or talking about in 5 years that we're not talking about today when it comes to this concept of connection?
I think employees are going to look more and more and more for employers to be part of their journey, right? Mm-hmm. So I think a great example is the work that we're doing with what we call our Ascend program, which is educational opportunities for individuals. We run it in partnership with Guild Education, which is an amazing organization. But I think in 5 years' time, it's not going to be a nice to have. It's going to be an imperative for organizations to be able to sit down with an employee and say, where do you want to go? And here's how we can get you to where you want to be. If that's for a year or 5 years or 10 years, whatever it is, we're going to have to be able to tell that story much more significantly, much more impactfully than we do today, right? And so much of that is based on personal relationship, right? They're asking for a personal and not a transactional relationship, right? Benefits are nice, pay and PTO is nice, but here's what I want as a human being. Here's who I am and what I want to become. Help marry that with what the organization is trying to achieve. We're going to have to do that more than ever. The other thing that I think is crucial is innovation in the way that individuals create value and in the way that they deliver that value. Healthcare is notorious, right? A nurse is a nurse is a nurse, and you do nursing, and that's what you do. And there's a set of work that you do as a nurse. And some of that is probably not changeable or not easily changeable. But just in general, we are going to have to be far more innovative in the way that we envision people creating value for the organization and the way that we allow them to create that value and the flexibility in the way that we allow them to create that value. Because if we don't, somebody else is going to. Job and role innovation is going to be just as critical as technical innovation, as operational innovation. And I think it is going to be crucial for organizations to get out in front of it.
One final question, which we ask every person who comes on the podcast, and that is purpose. So why do you personally do the work that you do?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Not to get too maudlin, not to bring the podcast down right at the end. A few years ago, my mom passed away. When I was at her funeral, an individual came up, and she's about my age, and she said, "Matt, your mom was one of my leaders at church when I was 12 years old." And she said, "I was going through a box recently and found an apron that your mom taught me how to sew." She says, "And I still know how to sew. I showed my kids, this is when I learned how to sew because of this apron right here and because of this woman who took the time to teach me that skill." And I inherited a lot of that, I think, of this love and passion for teaching and for giving folks the skill and the talent and the knowledge and the space and the safety to go succeed, to go do the things that they want to do so that they can be fulfilled and love their work. Being able to be that catalyst for others' joy at work is deeply meaningful and is absolutely my personal purpose. So the more that I can do that, the happier I tend to be. And like I said, I inherited it. I got it from a good source, just a love for teaching and helping.
Thank you, Matt. We appreciate you and everything you've taught our audience and us today. So thank you.
Thanks.
Beth, thank you for the opportunity.
Also, go Cougars.
Go Cougs!
Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Workplace Stories. Danny and Stacia, how can listeners get more involved in the podcast and of course with your great work?
Well, they can follow Workplace Stories by Red Thread Research on the podcast platform of your choice. And you can go to ratethispodcast.com/workplace stories and leave us ratings and reviews.
You can also share this or your favorite episode with a colleague or a friend.
You can check out our website at redthreadresearch.com to follow all of our latest trends in people practices and sign up to participate in some of our research.
Or Stacia, they could maybe
sign up for our weekly newsletter at redthreadresearch.com/newsletter and consider joining the Red Thread community by joining our membership.
And lastly, we're on Twitter at RedThreadRe, that's REDTHREADRE, or look up Red Thread Research on LinkedIn and follow our work.
And thanks so much for listening.
We would like to thank our friends at Torch for sponsoring this podcast season. Torch is the people development platform that fuels leadership development through the power of trusted relationships. By combining coaching, mentoring, and collaborative learning, Torch helps you develop successful leaders aligned with your organization's strategy and values. Our customers deliver compelling leadership development experiences to their employees in support of their strategic initiatives. These include high-potential programs, new manager onboarding, DEI change management, and others. The result is increased employee engagement, retention, and performance. Visit trch.info/redthread for more information. Workplace Stories is a production of Red Thread Research and the Learning Futures Group. Thanks for listening.